Dan, I just want to know how you read into this press conference, lasting just about 80 minutes from the president and other administration officials, including Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan King, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and others spoke as well. What was your takeaway?
I can assure you I was not alone in watching it here in Israel. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Defense Minister, everyone else involved in decision-making was watching too. I think they'll want to know whether they can continue this war, a war that the Israelis are measuring by day-to-day achievements, or whether everything will be over within 24 hours, give or take. Keep in mind that the president outlined what he described as a critical juncture in the war where it could go one of two ways, really 180 degrees, either a peaceable solution, as the US would define it, or a significant escalation and wide-scale destruction of Iran, including civilian structure. So given that that would have impacts on the downstream effects, this is something that was raised in the press conference in terms of confidence perhaps among the Iranian population, support for this war, given that they would suffer more directly should civilian infrastructure be hurt. The implications could be really wide-ranging. As you noted, the president kept a degree of strategic ambiguity around the term ceasefire. It was a very discursive press conference, like many of his are, but on that, he refused to talk. Now, this could be deliberate ambiguity over talks which he says have been going on apace. The Iranians deny, or have essentially denied that those talks are underway. It could also be that he's aware that there's an Iranian affront to the term ceasefire. The Iranians have said that they worry that the idea of a ceasefire would expose them to renewed attack in the future from Israel or the US once the allies regroup. It could be that Trump is aware of this. It could be he's trying to step away from that nomenclature for a different term other than ceasefire, something that might calm the Iranians enough to have them enter a deal that would effectively end the war, perhaps not peace, perhaps not something north of a ceasefire, something between the two, but different phrasing that would help them get this deal over the line, if indeed there is deal making behind the scenes.
Dan, I am curious about the ability to continue war. Great story by you. Israel assessing that Iran still has more than 1,000 missiles capable of reaching it, while Hezbollah's arsenal in Lebanon includes as many as 10,000 shorter range rockets, according to military briefings cited by Israeli media this weekend. Dan, where are we in this process? And this is something we talked about in our planning call this morning. Like, where is the U.S. military? Where's Israel? Where's Iran? The actual military hardware capable of continuing this war?
Well, to hear the president tell it, this war has been won. The Iranians are in disarray. He said they have no communication structure internally. That's a bit hard to reconcile with what we're seeing on the ground. And indeed, the messaging, as you noted, from Israel, specifically the military, with unusual openness. It's worth noting that in the course of this war, certainly as it began, the military declined to give its assessments of force strength in Iran, specifically the Iranian missile arsenal. This would be a critical issue, not just in terms of the threat posed by Iran to Israel, to Gulf Arab states in its vicinity, to U.S. bases and targets in its vicinity, but also it's a measure, a good yardstick of the duration of the war. All you need to do is count the number of missiles fired a day and just extrapolate from that if you have the full number of missiles remaining in Iran's arsenal. Suddenly, an Israeli officer in charge of intelligence for the Air Force gave an interview on Israel's main news channel saying they had more than 1,000 remaining. Now, I can tell you in off-record briefings we got at Bloomberg at the beginning of the war, we were told that number was around 2,000. So if that's correct, in 5 weeks of war, they reduced it by half. That would be some spent in firing at Israel, some destroyed on the ground by Israel and the US. But that gives you a sense that the current rate of fire, potentially the Iranians could go on for weeks, perhaps even months. And the same applies to their Hezbollah ally in Lebanon, which is directing rockets at northern Israel and at troops invading the south of Lebanon. It's worth remembering that just overnight, last night, the Iranians managed a missile strike in the northern city of Haifa that killed a family of four, an elderly couple, their son, his wife, and they are managing to inflict damage and casualties. The Israelis are reckoning with a continuation of this in the absence of a ceasefire. They're saying they're willing to continue fighting, but there is a price.
Well, let's talk about that, Dan, and end with that, because you are joining us from Jerusalem, where the attacks certainly have continued in the country of Israel. What can you tell us about what the Israeli government and the Israeli military is prepared for in terms of duration?
To hear them tell it every additional day is a blessing. I use that word guardedly, but it was used by an Israeli cabinet minister on a radio interview today. A blessing in that Israel finally has the opportunity, the tactical environment in which to inflict lasting damage on its arch enemy, Iran, an enemy whose enmity goes back 47 years, really has radiated around the Middle East, including groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, etc., supported by Iran. However, the Israelis, it's worth noting, despite the enduring threat, are signaling a return to normalcy here and there. Cinemas have started showing films again. Airlines are expanding the number of passengers allowed on outgoing flights. There's even talk potentially of a return next week of some school students to their schools. So it would appear the Israelis are trying to make adjustments while still pursuing this war as long as they can in order to achieve a lasting effect. If not peace, then at least a destruction and deterrence of their main enemy.
Is there a clear message, Dan, about the intent from Israel, the Israeli government, on the war and kind of where we are and bringing it to an end? And I'm also curious about how that contrasts with messaging throughout the region.
Well, I think the US president, there's a reason everyone stopped in their tracks to watch that 80-minute sprawling, very interesting press conference. He's calling the shots. No one doubts it, including Iran, I imagine, certainly Israel. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in a press conference said openly that Trump is the, quote, leader of this campaign, that Israel is the, quote, ally, i.e. the junior partner in this campaign. If Trump calls it quits, Israel will as well, not necessarily in Lebanon, but certainly when it comes to Iran. And if Trump continues, the Israelis will continue as well with military parity, military partnership. It's worth remembering the Iranians, as some of their terms for a ceasefire, have been a comprehensive ceasefire on all fronts. That's a reference to Lebanon, to their ally Hezbollah, that Israel really is trying to diminish militarily as much as possible, including with an invasion of Lebanon. Israel will try to pursue that. So it could be that if there is a discussion of ceasefire terms, the Israelis are saying, Mr. President will accept it, but we need to keep fighting in Lebanon. At least there we can achieve material gains for a threat that's really on our border, literally within touching distance in the past, across a very close fence, the border fence between Israel and Lebanon. So those would be the Israeli conditions. But if the war is called off vis-a-vis Iran, you can imagine that Israel would fall into line very quickly with that.
What was the weekend like? I feel like I'm going backwards, but what was the weekend like for you in Israel?
It was actually a holiday weekend here. It was the Jewish holiday of Passover. There is a number of days between the opening days, the closing days of Passover. The festival ends tomorrow evening. Much of the country was shut down for that. However, no vacations, no school holidays, no school camps. And in fact, the main feast of the Passover holiday was held by many people inside bomb shelters and very close to bomb shelters, given the number of sirens. Just today, there were 6 missile launches by Iran at Israel. People have gotten used to scrambling for shelter, including in the middle of the night. That includes the town where I live. You get used to it. The country is pretty used to this. This is pretty the tail end of a 2-year and 6 or 7 month war that began in Gaza, a war that really sees Iran as having orchestrated from the top on several fronts. So I think Iranians see this war with Iran as a necessary cresting, and they hope a necessary conclusion of that regional war.
30 seconds before we leave you. Have we created an enemy that's even a bigger enemy in Iran?
Well, there's some talk of the new supreme leader being more radical than his father. There is some talk of Iran coming out of this war and deciding to push ahead with a nuclear program, with a nuclearization program to a bomb that it always denied wanting officially, but is widely suspected to have been pursuing slowly. Again, at the end of the day, there's means and there's motivation. Even if the motivation increases as a result of this war, the question is whether they have the means to make it real. If you listen to the Israelis and the US tell it, and if you watch the bombings going on in Iran and the decapitation of Iranian leaders, it would appear that they've not only been denied the means, they've been denied the means for years and perhaps for decades hence.